Welcome to our video series where we're getting into conversation to explore topics that our guests are passionate about. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by David Michel. David, for those people who have not yet had the opportunity to meet or work with him, is a deep Agile thinker, practitioner, speaker, coach, and a common contributor to the Agile community. You may have seen him at Agile Oxfordshire, one of the meetups that he organises, and you can see him on YouTube as well with his new or relatively new channel on YouTube, where he shares some absolutely fabulous content. Everything from slicing to velocity. If you're new to Agile or you're interested in picking up some tips, it's a strongly recommended place to go. David comes to Agile from a background in physics, including a PhD in biophysical chemistry, if I've got that correct, David, where he grew a passion for software development, so much so that in his own words, he doesn't just talk about Agile, he practices it every single day on software development projects. So right. First of all, a very warm welcome, David, and thank you for joining me on this conversation today.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation. It's great. It's great.
A great pleasure, and especially because the topic of conversation today, I think this could be quite an interesting conversation in any case, which is delivery at the expense of discovery.
Yeah.
So let's start with, well, let's just take the subject head on to begin with. And what do you mean when you talk about delivery at the expense of discovery? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that there's fundamentally two types of activities that we do when we work on projects, especially software projects. And there's delivery and discovery, and broadly speaking, discovery is about understanding what we actually need to be doing. It's about building the right thing, whereas delivery is about building the thing right in a way, right? That means getting with a robust, scalable, reliable, secure, technically sound, and all those good engineering things released. And then the project management thing as well, like released in a timely manner, and perhaps without costing the world, right? But you have these two aspects, discovery and delivery, and they can be at odds with each other sometimes. And I found that as an industry, we tend to be obsessed with delivery. There's lots of job titles out there. You see, you have delivery managers and things like that. You rarely see anything about discovery. So I feel like discovery is often quite neglected, and often people don't even know what you're talking about really when you use that word. And that lack of discovery can be a real problem, right? Because it can basically mean that you can build the wrong thing really well, right?
Yeah.
and that's a problem, right? So that's what I mean, roughly speaking, about what delivery at the expense of discovery.
Okay, so it sounds like something that teams need to balance, as you describe it in the first place. What sort of things have you seen? The impact, if you see a team focusing too heavily on delivery, what sort of experiences have you got in there? Or what's the impact of that?
So one of the, some of the problem is that it's basically the illusion of success, right? When you, so let's say, that you've probably seen those memes online sometimes when you see, like a surgery went well, but the patient died, or what's the other one I saw? Great landing, but wrong airport, this kind of thing. Yeah. So, and I've seen countless projects where there is this celebration of success, but for the wrong reasons. Like, we were on time, on budget, on scope, the typical sort of traditional project management view. But the thing is that tells me nothing, absolutely nothing about, whether value was delivered. And whether the piece of software was useful, did it actually solve the problem well? The on time, on budget, on scope doesn't really address that. So there's a bit of an illusion of success here, right? And it goes down to how people define success to begin with.
Yeah,
and it's that balance, right? Because of course, you don't want to just keep discovering, exploring stuff. Yeah, at some point you need to deliver things, right? There's an obvious need to deliver stuff, but there's a real danger here to fall in the trap of just delivering without really taking the time to think about whether we're actually building the right thing.
I definitely recognize the kind of symptom you're talking about. There are a number of teams, squads, groups, whatever, working that I've seen. And often if I ask a question like, well, a simple question, what are you aiming for? What is the value that you're trying to achieve in this group? What are you delivering for who? They struggle to answer that question. Or the end of a sprint, even if a team's using Scrum, did you meet the goal that you intended? Well, kind of run out of road pretty quickly, which is, as you say, if Agile is all about value in the first place, it's a rather sad indictment of that position for those teams.
Yeah, I think a lot of people talk about value in Agile, or claim to talk about value, but actually, if you listen to the conversations, it's rarely talked about. Like you say in the sprint review, people ask questions like, "Oh, did we deliver all the items that we said we would deliver? What are we going to do with the one that was not delivered? Do we put it to the next sprint? Do we not? Do we?" And this is just about delivering stuff again, right? But that people are often not asking
exactly.
the right question.
So is it worth exploring a little bit about what might be causing that? What are or perhaps some of the reasons why teams do focus so much on delivery rather than discovery?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because you think it's obvious, right? You think, well, of course we want to build. I mean, nobody sets out to build the wrong thing, right? so
No.
You know, it might feel, it's obvious, right? What are you talking about? But because it's so obvious in a way, I think it also becomes this underground thing, right? Not underground, but how would you say? It's implicit and it's sort of taken for granted. Of course, we're building the right thing, but it might not be the case, right? And I think I see this all the time, sadly. But I think it might be a bit of a B2B, business to business versus B2C, business to consumer thing. There might be some of that going on, right? So in the B2B world, where I come from, you see that problem quite a lot. But when you're developing for consumers, which is not really my world, but I suspect you might see that a bit less, right? Because in the B2C world, right, the users are choosers, right? In the sense that they have to choose to use your thing, right? And they don't have to, right? If you're building an app, on the Android store, let's say, or whatever store like that, the users have to go, yeah, I want that, I'll click on that and get it. But if they don't have to, right? So if you're in that world, you have to focus on discovery, right? One way or the other. Otherwise, the real world will, hit you in the face pretty hard. If you build the wrong thing, you're going to know that pretty soon. But in the corporate world, it's kind of where the problem comes from. And where does that come from? It's a good question. I think it's partly, partly psychological, partly cultural. I think the culture aspect is again a definition of success, right? If you ask most project managers, what's your definition of success? There's often going to be again, like I said earlier, on time, on scope, on budget. And there's just no mention of value, right? And it brings me to this concept, you might have heard of this, this output versus outcome thing, right? Like the two words seem like they could be interchangeable, really, but they're very different, right? Output being the thing you do, the thing you produce, right? And outcome being the benefit you get from the outputs. So of course you need outputs to get the outcome. And without outputs, you don't have any outcome at all. But it's very easy to have outputs that don't actually produce any good outcome, or even worse, it could create bad outcome. It could have an actual negative effect. So again, we want to ask the right question. We want to shift the focus from output to outcome. But I'm getting I'm getting away from the original question, I think, which is,
Yeah.
why is this happening?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts in there. Just see what
Sure,
you
yeah.
think, because there's uh, there are probably some things to explore. I was going to use the fear word just in terms of fear of doing the wrong thing. So,
Yeah.
And maybe that links to your point about culture. Actually,
Yeah.
if I'm the person who admits that the thing that we're working on nobody wants, how does that make me look? What's my
Yeah.
reputation in this organization now? So I'm not
Indeed.
going to do that. I think maybe that's one thing to think about. The other thing that caught me when I was thinking about us talking here was that when you look at a lot of the frameworks that these teams use, whether it be Scrum or otherwise,
Mm.
the maturity of those things is often assessed in terms of, say, how quick we ship. So
Yes.
we are an agile team because we ship often. Well, hold on. To the conversation where you just started, shipping often may be brilliant, but it also may not be. And I was scratching my mind to think, or scratching my head, sorry, scratching my mind. That sounds rather dangerous. But to think about when have I worked with a team who truly have a kind of fitness for purpose kind of measure, or an awareness truly, and it's very few.
It's very rare indeed. And again, I think that you hit it on the nail there with the fear or the psychology behind it, right? Because I mean, I guess if you ask people, would you rather be wrong, or would you rather not know about something? And I think a lot of people would prefer to be wrong. Weirdly enough, because living in this uncertainty is well, it's not comfortable, right? It's not comfortable for most people, if not everyone, to some extent. Living in the vague, right, is often how I call it. Is not
Mm,
comfortable, right? Or admitting that you don't know, and we need to find out, which is what discovery is about, right? It's admitting in a way that, okay, we don't really know what people actually need. uh,
exactly.
and so let's explore that, therefore, right, as opposed to assuming that, okay, we do know and we're going to do that, and just going about the delivery of it.
I was just thinking maybe there's a little bit of avoid using the word fear again in this context, but when many teams move from waterfall approaches to agile approaches to things, there's this idea of course, we don't do lots of upfront analysis of what we might need to build because there's high potential it will change, and we know that as people see what it is we're building, opinions change, needs change, and so on, which makes a great deal of sense. Um, could that be some of that hesitancy in here to think about discovery comes from, well, we're agile. We don't do lots of discovery up front, and it almost becomes like the discovery piece is a bad word.
Yeah, well, you'd hear people talk about the discovery phase, right?
Well,
Like
exactly, yeah.
thing that you do before, and then you deliver stuff, right? So, which is a very waterfall sort of way of thinking, isn't it? And discovery is not a phase, right? It's something you have to do all the time, and there's this wonderful phrase from and I forgot her name right now. I think it's Ellen Gottesdiener. She has this book called Discovery to Deliver, and Deliver to Discover and Discover to Deliver, right? You have to do both. It's a loop, right? And you have to constantly go from one to the other. They are completely intertwined in one in another, right? Because sometimes to be able to deliver something, you have, instinctively you think you have to know what you need to build first, so you need to do a bit of discovery, but at some point you need to deliver something to kind of validate that, right? And sometimes you need to deliver stuff in order to discover more, right? So you have to keep going in that loop. It's two different mindsets, and they have to be done all the time, which is difficult.
Yeah.
So, for example, the MVP concept, right, is a for me at least is a typical sort of discovery activity. And I know you're smiling there with the MVP stuff because it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I'm not sure we
No,
want
no,
to
no,
go down.
no. I'm glad to join you in this conversation. So go ahead, David.
There's lots of misunderstanding, right, about what it is,
Indeed, that's why I smile.
or at least some disagreement about what this is,
Yeah.
right, and what it means. But for me, it's a discovery activity, right? The point is to test a business idea, right? So you do a small thing because you don't want to make so much money, just in case you're wrong, right? So you make it small, but the point is it's a test. It's trying to test your idea before you spend a crazy amount of money and effort and time on this thing. And that's fundamentally a discovery thing, right? Just like creating prototypes, just like or even just like sprinting in Scrum, right? The idea that okay, we're gonna not tackle the whole project, but just do 2 weeks of work and see where we're at the end. That very idea is a sort of discovery idea, right? Let's do a bit and validate that. Right? The problem is that at the end of the sprint, most people don't do any validation. They just move on to the next lot, and to deliver more and more and more and keep the velocity going. And that's a problem. But yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. The MVP concept used in the right way. I often hear people talk about it as a definition of good enough. As we'll do that and then we don't have to do any more.
Yeah.
Well, that just sounds like that's not used in the spirit of exploration and understanding. That's used in the spirit of not over-engineering.
Yes. So people took this concept of MVP and which is again for me a discovery thing, but turned it into a delivery thing, right? Like let's do the minimum that we can get away with, and then we'll see if we have time. We could do extra bits and blobs here and there. That's a delivery mindset, right? It's a list of must-have, and then we'll do that, right? But again, that's a delivery thing, not a discovery thing, and it's a shame really because it's such a powerful idea when you do it right.
Yeah, which has got to sit in the right kind of an organization. There was just to maybe link to that thought. Well, it was a nice Tom Gill video I watched fairly recently of him talking about delivery of value and trying to remind everybody that this is all about value in the end, regardless of whether you talk about frameworks. What we're really trying to do is create some kind of an outcome for somebody. That's broadly what we're trying to achieve. But his point, standing up at a development conference to say, sometimes you don't need to write any code at all to satisfy a requirement. So
that's right. Yes.
Stop doing that, or to satisfy a need to meet. Let's instead get back to. But then, as you said, you've got people throughout an organization who are motivated, or rather, they're engaged in delivery, whether it be a delivery manager. You might be brought in to. I've recently got asked, actually, as part of a piece of work that I'm doing, someone's asked me to get involved in something because they really want to see the cycle time drop for a particular thing. This isn't a software project, it's a delivery and a rollout thing, but they're talking about that cycle time dropping. I've started asking questions, probably exactly as you would, about, well, what actually is the outcome here? Are people really happy with the outcome? Is the aim to have a faster cycle, or is the aim to have a happier stakeholder, or more quality in what comes out of the other side? And they're struggling to answer that question because the only thing they've got in their mind is a timeline, and I've got to deliver.
Yeah. And I think there's also probably need to distinguish here between the different levels of management, or at least in my experience, I've seen
that would be useful. Yeah.
The people are way at the top of companies, like the founders and the CEOs and the people with the purse, right? They with the money, they often, I think, well, at least in my interactions with them, they understand, the value, because at the end of the day, they're probably closer to, the end users and their clients and so on. So if value is not there, they're going to feel that perhaps firsthand. And I found that it's the middle layer rather that's often causing the issue, right? In terms of having more of a finite sort of mindset, and being delivery focused, because their incentive is around being on time. Because if they're not on time, they're going to get in trouble. If they're not building to the budget, they're going to be in trouble, etc. So they are pushed back into that corner by the system, by the cultural system that we often live in, which is often difficult. But the founders and the CEOs of the world, they often go, oh yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. That's fine. We'll do the next thing. So they're thinking in terms of discovery, but at really long timescales, right? Like a year or two, right? We tried this project, it took 2 years and it failed. That's okay, we'll move on to the next thing. And that's where they're missing the agile, the speed of agile, which we talked about earlier. But the speed of agile there is meant to reduce that cycle, so you get faster learning, right? Not just faster delivery, because you can, if you deliver stuff faster, you could just deliver crap faster, and that's not really good, right? What you want to do is increase your speed of learning and your speed of discovery to be building the right thing, because that's what ultimately matters most, right?
Certainly some of that resonates for sure. That there's this is a generalism to say this, but the organizations that I've engaged with in my career so far, when we talk about agile of any kind, whatever flavor or thing that might be, leaders don't know how to behave, or kind of aren't. So the middle management layer you talk about don't really understand what their role is, and I spend quite a lot of my time helping them to understand how they can operate in this kind of world. If everything has all been about budgets and about efficiency and so on, it's very easy to get into that mechanistic kind of view of this. And of course, when a plan somewhere or a release train or whatever it is starts to not look like it's it's not going in the right way, we default to the behaviors which we're used to, which is to put more pressure on the teams, to potentially add more people, which we know is a dangerous thing to do, and all of those kind of very standard responses. They don't necessarily know how to act.
In the Scrum framework, where people talk about backlog refinement, right? And which is kind of where this is meant to be happening in a way, right? Like figuring out the details and understanding things. But that's where the problem lies, right? It's just about the details, or at least the way it's framed, right? It's as if there was no need for discovery, because it's just the knowledge is in someone's head, the product owner, and you just have to somehow tease the detail out, and so you're ready to develop, to do the delivery again, because that's what we really want, deliver stuff, right? But there's very little space for understanding what needs to be happening, right? And I've always been a bit puzzled by the Scrum, and I might be saying something controversial here, I don't know, but we'll see. But that you finish the sprint, you do the review, and straight away you start the next sprint. But there's almost no time at all to understand, okay, we've just delivered something here. How are we going to validate this? How are we going to know whether people like it, or it's useful or valuable? There's just barely no time for that. And I would love to see more time spent there, right? Because it takes time to understand whether the thing you've literally just delivered something. How do you know whether it was the right? Should we have spent all that time on it? We don't really know yet. I mean, this really just out the door. And I wish there were more time for that, or at least more focus on this. And you can see in the way people do sprint reviews and things like that, right? They're not asking the right questions. They're not asking, are users using this? How many users are using that feature? Do they like it? Does it solve their problem? How well does it solve their problem? All of those questions are often not really asked.
No, exactly. That's a brilliant set of questions. That's significantly better than the thing I said earlier about, did you meet your goal?
Yeah,
because
well, the goal is already a good one.
There's another assumption in there that the goal was meaningful in
that's right. Yes,
that sense.
Yes.
So that sounds like well, exactly, especially if you've got a team now operating almost in a microcosm with no stakeholders in that review, possibly even if you've got a product owner, there is such a spectrum of capability and engagement and levels of product owners that we've all seen in these teams anyway. So yeah, you're absolutely right. In which case if the value of iteration, whether it's Scrum or otherwise, is that you do get an opportunity to see whether or not you're working in the right direction and you are potentially creating something that's going to be useful, you're right. We're starving ourselves of that opportunity.
Yeah, so I always say people slow down, right? And you'll go faster. But you have to slow down, getting the time to think, right? Getting the time to think, was this the right thing to do? Or instead of just churning features as fast as possible.
but it's really important, I think, that that question of was this the right thing to do is not a question that the team asks themselves.
No,
It's
indeed.
it's a genuinely empirical conversation where we talk to the whichever stakeholder it was that we were trying to produce something for. We get some indication that it was valid and valuable and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah. And you know, I went into a conversation, like maybe last week, in fact, it was quite recent, yeah, a few days ago or last week, where the question was not so much how we do these things, although that is a question for sure, but there was also a question of when. You know, when do we determine value, right? For, let's say you have a user story, right? Like most teams have user stories on their backlogs nowadays. And when do we determine the value of the user stories in the backlog? And the assumption was, well, it's upfront, it's before we build it. But because, you know, it's the product owner decides that, you know, and that's it. But if you think about it, the product owner, I mean, what does he know? What does she know? It's, you know, they're coming up with ideas. I mean, hopefully they know the domain, etc. So they have a good idea. They have a good guess. It's an educated guess, let's say. But the ultimate judge of whether something is valuable or not is the users, right? And
Yeah.
that's at the end of that's going to be at the end of once they have it in their hand, once it's delivered, once it's on their machine and they can use it. Before that, it's really just a guess, you know. It might be a good guess. I'm not saying people are dumb, right? Like we're just playing, you know, it's not like features are just randomly put into backlogs. People have thought about this stuff and hopefully they know their domain and then they know what they're doing, but it's still a guess, right? Or at least an hypothesis is how I like to put it, right? So there's an hypothesis that, you know, the work you do, the output, will turn into some outcome. But that's an hypothesis. We shouldn't take it for granted. And once the output is delivered, it's like, okay, well, let's check that, does this actually work, right? Does the feature actually does what we intended it to do? And did you even think about what you wanted the feature to do?
Yeah, and if not, what have we learned? Because
yes.
Even producing something that didn't satisfy a need, or rather it helps you to identify a new need or whatever it might be, that's taking the empirical view again of this is about we're learning along the way.
It's almost like a scientific approach, right?
Yes,
where you use the word hypothesis and experiments. You want to try things, and that makes me think of, you probably know the Kinevin framework, right? With the complex and complexity domains, which I think is a great model because it explains so much that I've seen in terms of, you know, we talked about earlier about why do people don't do discovery, and I think it comes down to a lot of that complexity versus complicated thing, right? So, you know, complicated being that the thing is inherently predictable. We just need to think about it. We just need to do some analysis or get an expert, or, you know, and we just need to figure it out. And I think a lot of people think that, or wish the world was in the complicated domain. So, you know, we thought about the feature, we did some analysis, so that's it. I've thought about it, so that's it. That feature is the right thing to do, and we're going to go and build it. But if you're in the complex domain where things are inherently, you know, unpredictable, really, you can't just plan that in advance, really. So it's almost as if we live in a world where we are agile technically, because, you know, people deliver stuff and then they can adjust their architecture if things are not as performance as it should and things like that, all the good technical stuff. But in terms of designing the product, we're still very much waterfall in the sense that the design of the products in terms of what it should do and why is completely upfront. And it's such a shame. And if we embrace that complexity thing a lot more, I think people would get a lot further, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupt. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say I agree very much. There are a couple of things in there, particularly that there's on the basis that what we might be doing, and probably in a software project where we're delivering something to a new market or otherwise, it's likely we're breaking new ground. The code itself, people have written functions like this before, undoubtedly, but used in this particular context, in this way, for these customers, in this way, with the other infrastructure we're integrating with, is all complex, at least in the sense that you're never going to get, you can't predict effect from cause. There's no relation. Yeah, you see it. You can probably do some lovely root cause analysis afterwards, but not
in retrospect. You could probably think,
yeah,
okay, that happened because this and that, and you
quite
make sense of it. But upfront is really almost impossible sometimes. Right?
it,
the great example is with Nokia, right? Like when they started to add cameras to their phone. Who could have predicted that? I mean, now everybody has cameras on every phone. I mean, I don't know anyone who's got a phone without a camera, right?
Yep.
But initially, the idea, let's put a camera on the phones, like, why? I mean, I'm sure they must have encountered analysis that people said, well, that's just a stupid idea. Like, why would you have a rubbish camera on your phone? Like, I'd rather, it's going to be rubbish. You can't zoom. You can't, why would anyone want that? They did it anyway. And now it's everywhere, but there was no way you could predict this really. So you have to probe the system. You have to kind of innovate and create stuff like this and see what sticks. And I think we're missing that very much in the way Agile is implemented most of the time. There's no space for creativity and innovation like that.
Yeah. The thing I was going to add about Cynefin particularly, because the thing that I've kind of I had a cursory understanding of Cynefin for a while, but I've gone quite a lot deeper more recently. But even when you find teams that experiment or are willing to try hypotheses and a probe, to use that language, I often see people doing things in a very linear way. So we're in that complex space where we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what ideas are going to work, but we're going to try this one thing for 3 months and see what happens. Where the epiphany, let's say, I had recently was doing multiple experiments at the same time, or multiple probes at the same time. So we're going to, in a simple example, is A/B testing on a website, I suppose. But I've done this with teams since, where you have multiple different approaches to solving a cultural challenge at the same time. Then see what happens.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I mean,
stop the things that don't work.
Because I've probably been on the same path as you, right? I mean, because when I first heard of this parallel experimentation thing, I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if
that sounds expensive.
and how would you know what works, right? If you many variables at the same time. Let's just change one thing and see what happens. Intuitively, let's just change that one thing and see how it goes. If we change too many dials at the same time, it's going to be quite chaotic, and you're not going to know what's happening. And I think for me, at least, the way I understood it was, well, it's not just random experiment in parallel. It's competing.
No, it's intentional. Right? Quite.
The competing ones, right? So because we're going to do experiment A, but we're going to do the opposite, right? The negative control in a way, right?
Yeah.
Of experiment B, that's the opposite of it, right? And there's this famous study of I think it was a car manufacturer or something in the 20s or 30s in the US, where they wanted to see if the light would impact the workers in the factory.
Oh yes, yeah, go on.
You heard of that one? Where if maybe we increase light, it will help, right? But if you increase light, okay, there could be all sorts of factors that affects this. So you want to do another experiment where you decrease light.
Exactly.
Right. And
I think this is the Hawthorne effect.
Yeah, exactly. The competing experiment, right?
Yeah.
Where you want to try both, right? And in this very case, in fact, the story is that they both increased productivity.
Yeah, the novelty was what increased the productivity. It wasn't anything to do with the light.
And if you did only one experiment, the one where you think the impact would be positive, because that's what people run in a biased way, then you'd see increased productivity. All right, let's increase lights everywhere, right? And then fail eventually because it had nothing to do with light.
Yeah, indeed. But of course, our traditional approach, and as you say, treating things as complicated or even simple, would mean that we've done that experiment, so now let's make it policy. This is now how we work around here, or this is now how this government implements policy, or whatever it might be. And yeah, you're right. Then we fall off that cliff into chaos when it doesn't quite work. I just bring us back to the kind of delivery discovery conversation. Just a kind of a last thought, really, for teams that perhaps recognize some of this. I talked a little earlier about that idea of dealing with uncertainty on a regular basis. But are there any things that you could or would recommend, or areas to look at, things to monitor, to measure, to care for, that might help you move or get the balance better?
Yeah, so I think so. It's been my battle for some time, this discovery versus delivery thing. So I've got some experience in that, and I found that if you go full blast, as do discovery, it typically doesn't go well, right? Because you go against culture, you go against the personality types, even people who don't like living in the vague. If you say, okay, velocity is kind of meaningless, let's stop measuring this. That's going to swim back at you big time. It's just not going to work. I find, it's too big a steps. People are not ready, so you need to take baby steps, right? And to take people out of their comfort zone, bit by bit. And often one thing I've done, for example, is I came up with this. I put on the slide, the famous quote from is it Peter Drucker, the famous American economist, right? I think I'm paraphrasing because I don't know it by heart, I'm afraid, but something like, "There's nothing so useless as doing very efficiently something that should not be done at all." Right, which is the problem of not doing discovery, right, and just keep delivering. So I've put this on the slides up on the screen, and then at a retrospective, for example, and go, okay, what do we think about that? Is this a problem we may have? Right, and you just open the question and see. So the point here is you seed the conversations like that, right? You try to change the questions, right? Like I mentioned earlier with our sprint reviews, where you ask, okay, where is the value for our users, right? Or at a planning session, instead of saying, well, we're going to order this, what's the priority for this? You could also ask questions like, how are we going to know whether this feature is successful? Question people don't really ask, right? How are we going to measure if it's successful? Can we even measure it? Those little questions sort of slowly but surely shift the mindset a bit. Right?
Yeah.
Because it is a different mindset. And it's difficult, right? Because something we haven't talked about, but it's such a different mindset between discovery and delivery. It's almost like you have to have a different split personality, right, in how you behave, right? Because let's say in the delivery mode, right? Okay, let me ask you that question, right? Should we deliver code that's not tested? Now, most people, right, I would bet, are going to say, that's bad. We should do that, right? But again, they're thinking of a delivery mode here, right? Of course, if you deliver something, it has to be tested. I mean, what if it doesn't work? You might look like a fool, right? If it doesn't work, it's just a bad idea, right? But if you're exploring, if you're testing, if you're experimenting, do you really want to test just your experiment? Maybe not, right? So if you have 3 days, let's say, and you might be able to do three 1-day experiments, because you don't do the documentation, you don't do the testing. Yeah. It sounds rapid, right? But you do 3 experiments. You can learn a lot from 3 experiments. You've optimized the number of experiments. But if you have to add all this stuff that you do for delivery, in 3 days, you might have time to do only 1 experiment. So you haven't learned that much. You've learned less, you've done only 1 experiment.
Yeah.
So in a discovery mindset, do you test just as much as you do for delivery? Probably not, right? So it's a very different mindset, and you need to be able to switch between the two, of course, because once you found the experiment that worked, right? You've done A, B, and C is really the thing that really works in terms of value. That's really valuable. People would love to have that. Then you need to switch to delivery mode and build the thing properly, right? And test it and do all the good practices that we know about to deliver the thing properly, right? And so you have suddenly the trick is to switch mode between, depending on what you're doing, and that's really hard, because I think depending on your personality type, you might be more comfortable in one area more than the other, So you have to go out of your comfort zone. I know I'm a discovery person, so once I've learned, I tend to lose motivation because, well, I'm not learning anymore. So, but I know some other people who are much more delivery type people, right? And
Yeah.
And if it's better for them, so it's difficult, right? That's the challenge.
Yeah, I like that very much, David. It struck me as well that would need to be, or that's a constant, or I say constant. It's a flip flop between those priorities over time. I've got the image in my mind of a wave kind of diminishing over time, because you start off with probably a relatively spiked discovery, not days and months, and but your point, if you did those experiments and go, right, this is the thing we want to build, then you definitely don't want to spend 6 months with your head down building, because that discovery is now out of date anyway. So let's continue to discover throughout the thing. It may not be the shape I described. That was just a convenient poetic device for me. But it was the point was a blend between those two things.
Yes, it is a bit of an art, right? And I think, even at the level of code, right? If you're reading, let's say you're writing this bit of code to connect to a database, let's say, right? And you've never connected to that kind of database before, you're going to try different stuff. You're not going to really test necessarily. You might do TDD and stuff like that, but you're going to explore a bit first. And once you go, aha, that's the way to do it. Okay, and now you scale it. Now you deliver it properly. Now you write it properly with comments and you make it nice. And all that. But do you spend all that effort already when you don't even know what you're doing at the beginning? Probably not, right? So I think a lot of people work that way at that scale. But it's a question of scaling it to the sprint. So in terms of a sprint, let's say, if you do Scrum, like what sort of discovery activities you do, what sort of delivery activities you do, and then at the project level as well, right? So in my head, there's different levels of doing this, and they're all kind of different scales, right, of doing this.
Yeah.
So it's not okay, today is a discovery day, but it doesn't really work. It's like, today let's be creative. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you can't plan that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put it on a plan. Quite. Well, I suppose that's the thing that goes in turn, doesn't it? So at a team level, we may do this. We have to at the same time be knocking on the doors of the middle management and the leadership in the organization, and holding them accountable. I say holding them accountable, making them care for measures like fitness or otherwise fitness for purpose of a solution, not just because a typical project report talks about, as you say, the iron triangle of time, cost, and quality, or whatever. But if we really start to connect people with whether or not the thing they're doing is being used and is a positive, it has multiple effects. You get potentially better business outcomes, of course, but it's much easier to motivate teams, in my experience too, when they know that they're working on something that means something.
Absolutely, right. And I think, well, in fact, the irony sometimes, when we said, delivery at the expense of discovery, the irony that it could affect delivery too, right? Because let's say you're not doing discovery at all. At least you can say, if you're doing delivery really well, you could say, well, at least we delivered what we said we would. There's some silver lining there, right? In some way. It's not great, of course, but at least you kind of promise you're reliable, right? It's a good thing.
Yeah.
You do that and you've done it. Good job. Right? But if you're not discovering at all, then I think you create that split as well. It's kind of, I think, what you were saying, that us and them thing, because there's the business people, right? The product owner, he's the man thinking about value, and we're just the builders, right? We're just delivering stuff. And so there's no collaboration there really between the business and the delivery aspects.
Yeah, quite.
And that it emphasizes that split, which is really bad idea, right? For collaboration, for innovation, for being creative. So ironically, that could really affect delivery, right? Because you're not gonna if you have a bad agile implementation, let's call it that way. You're going to change things from sprint to sprint. Things are going to change, right? But if you don't have any discoveries, this is going to be more or less random. How do you validate anything, right? If you don't have any way to validate value and any way to do discovery.
Yeah.
So your changes are going to be more or less random. and that is going to be seen, right? Oh, well, they said they would do this and they've given us something else. Okay. So you can't even fall back into, well, at least we did delivery really well, right? You can't really do that anymore, if that makes sense, right? Because you've been drifting along, right? Which is what I see happens to Agile team a lot, right? You just drift from sprint to sprint. Let's change this, let's change that, but there's no like the vision is not there, right? Or the vision of what value are we trying to achieve? What do we want the users to feel and get out of this? The North Star is missing, so you kind of drift away, and that makes your delivery look bad as well.
It's been a really good conversation, David. I've really been thrilled to talk to you about this subject.
Me too.